Hello everyone, and welcome to our podcast series in the classical political economy tradition by the Vinson Centre for the Public Understanding of Economics and Entrepreneurship at the University of Buckingham. The Vinson Centre runs a series of programs in economics and related fields designed to promote a wider understanding of classical liberal economics and how markets, trade, and entrepreneurship promote welfare in a free society. I'm Juan Castañeda, Director of the Vinson Centre, and today we'll be hosting Deidre McCloskey. Deidre McCloskey is a distinguished scholar and a Isaiah Berlin Chair in Liberal Thought at the Cato Institute. She's also a distinguished Professor Emerita of Economics and of History, and Professor Emerita of English and of Communication at the University of Illinois at Chicago. After getting her PhD in economics at Harvard, she taught at the University of Chicago and the University of Iowa. She has written 24 books and some 400 academic and popular articles on economic theory, economic history, philosophy, rhetoric, statistical theory, feminism, ethics, and law. Today, we will discuss with Professor Deidre McCloskey political economy, the essence of liberalism, and what explains economic growth. Nowadays, most universities offer programs in economics, but only a few in political economy. Could you explain the difference between them and why does this matter?
Well, it's clear that economics is an ethical and political, sociological and personal subject, certainly historical, and to pretend that it's none of those and is a pure field all by itself is not such a smart idea. I mean, in economics we say specialize, but then trade. And economists, when they're talking about international trade, they want to have trade. In their own field, they don't want to trade between law or sociology or history.
So we become monopolists ourselves.
Now monopolists or autarkists.
And that's not the best recipe we know as economists, isn't it?
Exactly.
So what would it be the main difference, the methodological difference, if you like, between these two disciplines?
Well, it would be what you pay attention to. I mean, if all you pay attention to is, and it's not just the math. People, I think, overemphasize mathematics as the problem. Mathematics is not a problem. It's a helpful tool. But it's what intellectual streams, what parts of science in a very broad sense, that you pay attention to. And I personally have started as an economist and then got to be wider, especially in the 1980s. And, I like to quote my great heroine, Mae West, who was a comic actress in the 1920s and 30s in movies. She said, "I was Snow White, but I drifted."
That's a great quote.
It is.
So if you were interested in history, politics, institutions, philosophy, and how they interact with economics, you would be effectively doing political economy?
Yes, but I recommend going further to what I and very few others call humanomics, which includes all those. I mean, look, we all have to specialize. We can't know everything. All right, but I would include poetry, plays. For example, you can learn a great deal about the self-consciousness of the middle class in Norway in the late 19th century from the plays of Ibsen. And you should. If you're going to think about how the world became modern, you'd better know about that. You can learn from the Bible, both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament, not just about the economic history, which there's a considerable amount of, but about attitudes towards the economy. And then if you're a Christian too, you can learn about what should be your attitude towards the economy. So altogether, human knowledge about the economy ought to include, human knowledge about the economy.
All right. So let's get a bit more specific, if you don't mind.
Indeed.
So say that you were made the dean of the School of Social Sciences and the Humanities in Buckingham University, where we are, and you could set up the curriculum for a new political economy program. What would you teach?
Well, the first thing I would do, I would resign because I don't want to be an administrator. Herding cats is about, the academic administration is in some ways like military intelligence, a contradiction in terms, but still, all that aside, I would urge my faculty to teach what they care about. I think we do too much curriculum specification. I think it's much better to be taught by a tutor or a lecturer who is speaking of what matters to her most deeply in connection with her field. She can't talk about, astrophysics if she's teaching economics. There's no overlap there. But she can certainly teach about novels she's read and how they interact with her understanding of the economy. And deans shouldn't be preventing people from teaching what they love, because it's the love of learning we're trying to convey, especially to undergraduates. The graduate students are already crazy enough to want to be academics, so we don't have to worry about inspiring them. They're already inspired. But the undergraduates need to learn to read serious books and to think about their life in a broader sense, because they're not going to be economists. We should stop having a curriculum that essentially creates someone who can go to graduate school in economics. It's unnecessary.
So would you start with a core set of courses on the humanities, including literature, history?
Well, the core courses are good, but again, they have to be passion.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be passion in the teachers and a conveyed passion to the students. So, for example, if you're going to do what we call in the English department a survey course from Beowulf to Virginia Woolf, that's the joke about it, I think you should include things, everyone should read a Shakespeare play. Everyone should have heard Chaucer, Wanataplu with his shure suit at the deuce the marches bears into the route. Everyone should know what Beowulf is, and maybe have heard it, and should know what, you should have heard about Keats and so. And so yes, there's some standard English curriculum that should be there, but there should also be things that appeal to the students now, which would be stuff from the internet and interviews with famous poets and so on. So the same thing is true of economics. We ought to have a mix of media and a kind of, I don't know how to put it in contact with their life. Although, look, one can go too far in that, obviously. There are some things that people need to know about economics that they just can't do without. They have to know supply and demand curves and marginalism, and they need to know national income accounting and macroeconomics. And, okay, so I've taught elementary economics, Ec 1, through novels. We would read The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, which is bad economics, but he's interested in the economy. We read Buddenbrooks by Thomas Mann, his first successful novel about his North German merchant family. And then, but also do the diagrams, and to the small extent you needed mathematics.
So it's very much the vehicle you use to convey the message.
Convey is a little bit too much. When in the communications department, I was also a professor of that, we call that the conduit model.
The conduit model.
Of communication, and it's wrong. It's not the case that there's a sort of a little pipe between your mind and mine, and I stick in objects into one end and they go into your mind. it should be a conversation between you and me, as right now. And that's how people learn, and it's what they should learn to do, is to have good conversations with their husband, with their friend, with their so that they go on learning after university.
No, great. That's very inspirational, I can tell you. Let's move on to a different topic. And this is something you have written on for decades now. What defines liberalism, and more specifically, classical liberalism?
Well, I've come to the conclusion, after thinking about it, as you said, for decades, that the best short definition is equality of permission, by which I mean not equality of outcome. That would be socialism, which works very well in a family. A family is a socialist enterprise and should be, from each according to her ability, to each according to his need. And nor equality of opportunity, which is the social democracy, left-wing democratic, or American Democratic Party. All the parties in Britain, for example, are equal opportunity people, and the problem with both of those is that they're unattainable. They really are. If you think through how you make some poor person who grows up in a highly dysfunctional family, make her equal to someone who grows up, well, as I did, as the child of a Harvard professor and an opera singer. How are we going to make us have equal opportunity? It just doesn't work. Whereas we can give equal permission to anyone at any time. We can let women have bank accounts, though married. We can let blacks vote in the South in the United States, though the whites would like to deny it, and so forth. And we can, it's equal. The first generation of liberals, Adam Smith, Mary Wollstonecraft, Henry David Thoreau in the United States, that was what they were asking for, equal permission, not equality of opportunity.
So it's to remove obstacles.
Remove obstacles. And the obstacles are myriad. There are many, many of them. And sometimes they're just damn silly, and we shouldn't have them. And they're enforced by the government. For example, occupational licensure. In some states of the United States, you need a state license to practice as an interior decorator. Now, come on, what terrible tragedy it'll be if we use the wrong off-white on the walls of your kitchen. And come on, stop it. But I would apply this to all professions. I don't think the state should be involved. You can have private certifications, that's fine with me, but they can't be enforced by the government. If you try to practice medicine in Britain without a license, so to speak, you end up in jail. The state enforces it, and I think that's just terrible.
In a world where individual freedom and responsibility were respected, which would be the role or roles of the state?
Very small, but say compulsory vaccination of your children from measles, polio, and other highly contagious diseases. You can't send a kid to nursery school or kindergarten who's going to infect his fellow students with measles. Measles is the reason the Spanish were able to conquer the Indians so easily, because the Indians were mainly dead. So look, there are things that the state should do. It should protect Britain from invasion from France. There should be the police. Perhaps not as many police as we have, but a kind of backup. Same with courts. There are private police and private courts, and they should be allowed to flourish, but then there should be a state backup, but not too much else.
And that's precisely what distinguishes, I can imagine, a classical liberal from an anarchist.
Well, that's right. I'm not an anarchist. Although I view them with sisterly affection. You know, I know anarchists. Walter Block is a good friend of mine, and I was much influenced in 1974 by Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia. But I think there should be a substantial state, but a small one. The kind of state that Adam Smith was advocating in the 18th century, and that he was the beneficiary of. He was the beneficiary, for example, of the small state-required elementary schools. And they weren't state-provided, which is another matter. There was a law in Scotland, which then melded into Britain, in Scotland, not in England or Wales, that the local landowners had to pay for all the girls and boys to be educated, to be able to read in Scotland in the 18th century. And Adam Smith was the beneficiary of this. But of course, he was against tariffs, and he was against public projects that could just as well be done by private parties.
Mm-hmm. In well-advanced economies, we seem to have forgotten about what explains economic growth.
Yeah.
You have written extensively about it. Which lessons can we take from history? What to do and what not to do?
Well, mainly what not to do. I mean, what not to do is to suppose that, well, actually, there are essentially two big groups of theories of economic growth. One is from the left, which says that economic growth is a consequence of exploitation, imperialism, for example, or exploitation of the working class. And then they say these profits, this surplus value stolen from India or something, or Africa, or from the working class, is then used to have accumulation, which then is the source of modern growth. On the right, they say, no, it's the wise investment of rich people. They're the heroes of the solid right wing, and it's their accumulation that's good. And I say neither of these is correct. It's not accumulation that made the modern economy. Capital accumulation is fine and desirable, but it's ancient. The Roman road system was a very substantial sort of accumulation. The terraced agricultural plots up the hills in southeastern and eastern Asia are another example. Accumulation has always happened. But what hadn't happened is to leave people alone. Let them have a go, as you say in Britain. In Australia, they say fair goes. And, you know, the Palms get to bat, and then England gets to bat. I mean, on the contrary. Australia gets to bat. And when that was established as a political principle, which gradually happened after 1776, that famous year in which The Wealth of Nations was published, there were some other things that happened of lesser importance.
Perhaps a couple of other things.
The publication of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire was also 1776. So it's letting people have equality of permission, which gradually expanded. Women didn't have equality of permission in either Britain or the United States until well after the Second World War. As I mentioned before, blacks in the United States certainly didn't. Robert Burns, the great Scottish poet and bard, couldn't vote in the 1790s because he didn't own enough property. but this gradual expansion of permission, that's what it inspired people. It inspired them to venture.
And then they could innovate.
They could innovate, and not just the big innovations, not just Edison and other famous people, but the little innovations of the worker going across from Ireland to Manchester to work in the mills. All that, the woman opening a hairdressing salon in the neighborhood, those are acts of entrepreneurship equivalent to the acts of Henry Ford's or the other big-time entrepreneurs.
So it's not just because quite often we put the emphasis on innovations themselves.
Well, the innovations are fine,
but we forget about
that's where it happens.
But it's we forget what motivates those,
well, that's right.
those innovations.
And it's what mainly motivates innovation is liberty, and that's the crucial point. That it's not a new theory of economic growth, because people said it in the 18th century and increasingly in the 19th century. But I'm saying it again against my beloved colleagues in economics and history. I'm saying, no, dears, it's not material accumulation. It's not terrible exploitation. It's ideas, and the idea in particular of equality of permission.
So, isn't it true then that we need to win the battle of ideas first?
Very much so.
If we want to go back to meaningful economic growth.
That's right. If Britain gets richer by innovating, as it has even to this day, the UK is an unusually innovative economy. There's a lot of woe is me whining among people in Britain about how sad things are. But this is still a quite innovative economy, and not just in financial services and a few other industries, but many industries, many parts of the economy. And indeed, what I'd like to emphasize is that innovation, we of course believe, is characteristic of art and music. And we think it's just wonderful that the Beatles came, and oh, isn't that great? And we allow equality of permission in the arts. We wouldn't think of regulating rock music, I hope. And the same is true of language. The Spanish or American or English language there's no government agency that tries to regulate them. And then they grow with wonderful, that there's a flourishing of the arts and the language if it's left alone. If individual innovators in both of those areas, arts and the language, are permitted to have a go.
So you would apply the same rationale to explain economic growth?
Absolutely.
So that means effectively to remove, for example, regulations from the market?
Well, for example, patents and copyrights. Mm-hmm. I know that some of my economist colleagues and many of my lawyer colleagues, friends, thinks that patents and copyrights are just wonderful things, and that they cause economic growth because they make ideas into properties. And I say they're wrong. That innovation comes not from making little monopolies, which is what both patents and copyrights are. The copyright on Mickey Mouse, the image of Mickey Mouse, was about to expire in 1998. And it's an extremely valuable asset. So the Walt Disney Corporation went to Congress and bought it for a surprisingly moderate sum, corrupting the Congress people by making contributions to their campaigns, some of them illegal, I suppose, but mostly legal. And so Congress passed what in the economics trade, is called the Mickey Mouse Protection Act of 1998, which extended the copyright, now hear this, in the United States from 50 years after the death of the creator, in this case Walt Disney, to 70 years after the death of the creator. So the great-great-grandchildren of Walt Disney are getting free money. Why? ¿Por qué? What the hell is going on here? We don't need to protect copyright and patents anywhere near as long as we do. I'd rather abolish them entirely. But if you want them 6 years, 10 years, I don't want my books to be to go on earning monopolies, monopoly rents forever. In fact, most innovations in industry and in the arts are either not patentable, such as ideas in mathematics, or copyrightable, but what the incentive profit that they earn comes from the first, what we call in our jargon, the first mover advantage. You invent some industrial process that's a little better than your competitors, and you don't run around telling them about it, although you could do that and then buy assets that are increased by their use, which has the same effect, probably more of an incentive effect than patents or copyrights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I was thinking of the situation where we are now, in which it's also a problem of our mentality, how we see our lives under the state now. Is whenever we have a need, we resort to the state.
Well,
what can the government do for me?
Well, that's the trouble. A long time ago, 1944, Friedrich Hayek wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom. And my friends on the left still say, oh, gee, that's stupid, because look, we're not serfs. We haven't got the Communist Party in charge in Britain or the United States or France. So he must have been wrong. But in 1956, he pointed out that there's a self-inserfment that people do. By remaining children, mommy and daddy state take care of us. And that's not what we want. We don't. I often call liberalism, in which I always stutter, adultism. That's what we want. We want adults, and it's not about selfishness. These adults are responsible and caring adults. They care, of course, for their families and Uncle Fred and so forth, but they also care for their neighbors and for their nation and for poor people in the world. And that's a fine thing, and I urge it, but we don't need the state to be involved. We shouldn't, because the state is a insurfer. It's it makes you back into a child. Because as you say, if it rains, we call on the state. Well, it's undignified.
Yeah, because then we end up in a situation where we are now, where the size of the state represents roughly, depends on each country, but anything from 35% to 50 or 50+% of the national income.
And that's just the expenditure.
Yeah.
And as you know very well, then there's a steadily expanding range of regulation. In my country, some local governments, especially in progressive areas, make it illegal to send your children out to play. That is, when I was a child, which was quite a long time ago, my mother at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday would say, go out to play, come back when the street lights turn on. And she might give me a little bag lunch or something to eat as I was. And so we went out and played together without adult supervision. If we wanted to play baseball, we got a bat and a ball and a couple of gloves and played baseball. Now you have to be watched by adults all day long, or else literally the Child Protection Agency will come to your door the next day, and if they don't like what you're doing, they'll take your children away from you. And this is the extension of state power way beyond the market.
Yeah, we need to go back to a world in which we have much more freedom, but also responsibility, personal responsibility.
Exactly. I'm not advocating doing anything you want. bringing your AK-47 military weapon into your church and for that matter, shooting it off in the church.
Deirdre, don't even think about doing that in this country. You can't.
I know, but in my country, it's not only thinkable, it's done.
Yeah.
And we've got to, that's ridiculous. That's, look, this whole idea that economists have of externality has gotten to be much too big. But on the other hand, there are externalities. There are spillovers. And bringing an AK-47 to church and shooting it, that's an externality I want to stop.
For anyone interested in liberalism, we very much recommend them to read your books.
Please do.
That we'll list in the description section of this video. But which other books would you recommend?
Well, it's always Your Last Child who's the favorite one. And I'm working on a book called, which hasn't been published, but I'll be glad to send people versions of it if they want. It's called Equality of Permission, The Essential Liberalism. Because these others, equality of opportunity or equality of outcome, are nice and attainable within a small group of friends or family, but unlike equality of permission, are not achievable in a large society.
And which other book has influenced you the most?
Well, lots of books. I mean, as I mentioned, Robert Nozick's 1974 book. The one I was much influenced by. I'm influenced by lots of things. Richard Rorty's book on epistemology was influential on me, and I don't know, the Bible. But it's easy to say that. When Donald Trump was asked what his favorite book is, he said the Bible. But I doubt very much that he's opened its pages ever. He holds it upside down when he's displaying it.
Well, thank you so much, Deirdre. It's been a fascinating conversation. I truly enjoyed it. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, the feeling, this is mutually advantageous exchange.
Yeah, I really learned a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you all very much for listening. This podcast is edited by the Vinson Centre at the University of Buckingham. You can visit our website at vinsoncentre.com to access our podcast series and know more about the programs and events we host, both in Buckingham and in London. Please subscribe to our newsletter if you want to receive timely information on the Vinson Centre's agenda.